this is one of those things I wanted to do for every review. Show every logo and play the prelude for every Final Fantasy game. Because, me, I like how different they sound, and I like to play a guessing game with myself to see if I can identify which one's which. I do that with a lot of things. I guess I'm just insane like that. But it became pretty clear to me that even though I made all of these, I couldn't actually do it because this sort of thing just stretched out the review way too long. Anyway, let's get back to this review over here. It's 1986. There haven't been many reviews of Final Fantasy. There's Spoony did one that was 10 minutes long, and it was essentially an April Fool's joke. And I can see why his was only 10 minutes long. There's only so many things you can say about this game. Given that all my other reviews are going to be about as long or even longer, I don't think the first one should be short-shrifted. So I didn't. But that meant was I had to spend the first 20 minutes talking about very obvious things like how to play a Final Fantasy game, like accept and cancel tells the characters what to do, and if anybody was having fun watching the review, they turned it off right about then. The problem with this review is that it doesn't actually start going until, I don't know, part 3, like 33 minutes into it, and that's a mistake I made, and that's a mistake that's entirely my fault. And I forced myself to fix that when I made the Final Fantasy II review. By the way, when you actually start researching Squaresoft and what it was, you start to see so many parallels between it and Shinra that I had to make the joke. A lot of reviewers, when they really like a game, will start to research it, and it will just feel like they've read a Wikipedia page and they're just reading it to you. I find that happens with a lot of reviewers, kind of like especially guys like the Irate Gamer. But so I forced myself not to do that, but I'm afraid it came out like I did. I actually played these games to actually see how they were, and they weren't that good. I wasn't going to do a review of them because it's not worth it. It's impossible to get footage from them, and you can play them like an hour, and they're better off forgotten. Games like Cruise Chaser Blasty and Will and the Death Trap, and some of them are okay, but Uematsu-san! I tried to make it a little interesting, but I'm not sure if I succeeded. But I felt it was important that I remain honest how I actually felt. I mean, I did want to identify which kind of Final Fantasy game I liked. I did want to make it clear that that if I had to choose my favorite Final Fantasy games, it would either be on the SNES or they would be on the PlayStation. They wouldn't be on the PlayStation 2. And they wouldn't be on the PlayStation 3. Like, I wanted to make it clear that I didn't think Final Fantasy IX was my favorite game. I like Final Fantasy IX, but I just think it's okay. There are things I like and dislike about every game. And I wanted to make that clear, too. And it's very hard to make jokes in the exposition period. Oh, I got into a lot of trouble for this. I'm not a Zelda fan. I like some of the Zelda games, but after Ocarina of Time, I didn't want to play it anymore. I mean, Majora's Mask sucked, and every other game was the same stuff, but just with more side quests. And I don't hate Ocarina of Time. I mean, I short-shrifted it quickly just to make a joke. I like Ocarina of Time, but the thing is, people like to compare it to Final Fantasy VII. And they say Ocarina of Time is better than Final Fantasy VII. And that is just the stupidest statement I've ever heard in my life. Ocarina of Time, if you compare the plot, Final Fantasy VII kicks the crap out of it. You compare the music, Final Fantasy VII kicks the crap out of it. You compare the customability. Every aspect of that game, if you compare it to Ocarina of Time, no, Final Fantasy VII kicks the crap out of it. I mean, I don't care. I really don't care about Princess Zelda. I mean, she always gets captured. The bad guy is always Ganon, and I just don't care. By the way, that's also another stupid thing I wanted to do. I wanted to put in every version of the game, so I put the Japanese version of Final Fantasy 1 in there. But nobody noticed, and I'm not going to do that again. One of the things I like better about Final Fantasy is that it didn't have to resort to the same old plot twists over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, like Zelda does. But nowadays, Square Enix doesn't seem to care about that, and that's what it's doing. so that doesn't help. Like, Ocarina of Time's music, it sounds like a bad cartoon. I mean, Final Fantasy VII actually had some, music. It had, like, humans. It had, real situations. Characters died and it meant something. And Ocarina of Time just doesn't do that for me. I mean, I couldn't... It's probably because I played Ocarina of Time when I was 20 and not when I was 10. But... Ocarina of Time just did not make a similar impact on me as it did with other players. But I got some comments, that I insulted Ocarina of Time too much. Well, tough. There's the team that made the good games. Yeah. That does explain a lot. I mean... Everyone always talks about how all Final Fantasy characters are like these emo girls, and they're not. I mean, they're all David Bowie, which is even stranger, I guess. Yeah, I was trying to set a real precedent here. I mean, it is kind of disappointing when you look at Amano's vision and the actual game. I didn't want to critique the game by modern standards. I didn't want to be like an idiot and go, "Dude, the graphics suck," because it was made 20 years ago. But I only wanted to criticize the game for what it could have been. And even in that direction, I think Final Fantasy falls short. A lot of people seem to take the goodness of the first Final Fantasy game for granted, which is something that should not happen. I remember the first time, before I even played the game, I looked at GameFAQs and tried to get a review of the game, and it was like, everyone rated it like 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. It was like, this is the first Final Fantasy game. You have to play it. Oh my god, it's so good. But it sucks. The first game is terrible. And for some reason, I find a lot of fans aren't willing to be critical enough. They find that 1 or 2 games were very good, and thus that sets the standard for what is good. And no matter where the series goes, it's still good. And I find that when they talk about TV shows or anything. I mean, let me try to give you an example. I mean, there are shows that are simply not funny, but they make some funny jokes once every episode. And people like it. So that, for them, sets the standards of funny. I mean, shows like Family Guy, which I hate. It's not funny at all. You will see people use it in videos constantly because, there's like one joke in there. When the show itself is the same old sitcom situations with one character acting really stupid and nothing but references to 80s TV shows with no joke to pay them off. They'll bring up Star Wars, but why? And they don't make a joke about Star Wars, or they don't make a joke about anything in the story. They just, hey, look, he looks like Han Solo, and he's there. It's not funny. And for some reason, because shows that take no effort are suddenly popular now, and they're considered funny, they're not working to make actual things that are actually funny. It's the same thing with Final Fantasy. I mean, people buy games like Final Fantasy 13. This is Dear Final Fantasy. Games that really took no effort to make. I mean, they really didn't have to think of a story. They essentially wrote a fanfic, But people buy it. So they think, oh, that's the new standard. Games like Kingdom Hearts, really. It sets the new standard, and that standard is bad. I wanted people to see what the standard should be, and I think the standard... It took Final Fantasy a long time to get to the standard. Some people think it started with Final Fantasy IV. I think if you played Final Fantasy IV now, you wouldn't think so. But happens a little later. I'd actually say the first good game was maybe 6, 5. Maybe you could say 5, but you'd be giving 5 a lot of credit. And even if you said 6 had problems. 4 is fun, but it shoots itself in the foot in the end. But I'll get to that later. Yeah, so I wanted to quantify somehow how good these games were. I didn't want to just give a 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10 without giving that number some weight. So that's what these 6 attributes were: the immersive world, the customization, the music, the innovation, the plot, and the characters. And I had to describe these because I thought, I'm going to be using these for every single review. But I find it's much easier in the scripts to just mention them in like 1 or 2 sentences and not dwell on them for 5 minutes. So, that's what I did. Yeah, I would have to say 9 and 10 did the best job for immersing me in the world. 13 almost got there. I mean, if they had the graphics that they have for 13 and they made Final Fantasy 9 with it, that would have been good. But again, graphics are not good enough. I should talk about the production of the video now. I need you to imagine, after wasting days and days figuring out how to edit this video, desperately trying to find footage for everything, all the jokes, trying to find some sort of image to match up with the game, you then realize that, oh wait, you have to split the thing up into 10-minute chunks. And saying, damn, I knew I had to do this, but why didn't I think of it before? So I had to find artificial breaks and split the video up into certain parts. And this was very hard for me to do because I didn't plan it, and you never really want to change anything. So what I had to do was find all sorts of little scraps of me in battles and fill up the parts when I'm talking with them. Find all sorts of clip art and stick them in there, and then cut up the videos and add it and speed up parts and slow down other parts, which is why there's a few parts there's a few areas in these 2 parts where I seem to speed up and the music speeds up. And about the music, that was probably the easiest part of the video, and I'm surprised how easy it was finding music pieces to fit into the review. I made a conscious decision to not limit myself with Final Fantasy 1 music, although there are some games like Final Fantasy 6 where I can do that. But I wanted to try to avoid the PlayStation games as much as possible. I didn't want you to be hearing Final Fantasy 7 music. I felt that should be held back for some reason. It's an artistic license that really only I'd understand, I guess. But yeah, that's what happened. I mean, yeah, I did spend too long on this. I mean, I've been talking for like 20 minutes and I haven't even mentioned the ineffective thing. And the ineffective problem is that's the most minor annoyance of this game, despite what you think. And it's the only problem anyone ever talks about, because it's the only difference anyone sees, and they see it immediately when they first start to play the game. I actually imagine that people who have even tried this game, they've only downloaded it and then they played it for like 5 minutes. They saw it ineffective and then they just turned it off. They haven't actually played the game. And when you play the game, the ineffective thing becomes an irrelevance. It really does. It's the rest of the game that pisses you off. And eventually, I guess I'm going to talk about it. I guess I was attempting to systematically disprove any claims of this game being good. Now gameplay. So I had to go from the story, which doesn't exist in Final Fantasy 1. Had to talk about the controls, had to talk about the immersion, had to talk about the world map, the music. And once you do that, there's really nothing left. So then you can just go through the game, which is, I guess, the fun part for me and for the viewer. I mean, when you actually talk about the game, that's when the editing speeds up. That's when the jokes start to flow. That's when you make better music choices. The problem is you got to lay the groundwork first for any of it to work.